Who've come this evening, and a few school committee members also. Thank you guys for coming.
So for those who don't know, this is a second forum in a series of 3 throughout the academic year. The first was on the Common Core standards. Tonight's presentation is on educator evaluation, and the final forum will be in April on the use of data in education. So thank you so much for coming out. We are going to, after the formal presentation, there'll be an opportunity for questions and comments. So feel free to jot some thoughts down if you have them during the presentation. There are note cards throughout the room.
And we'll probably gather them and ask them that way.
Okay. With that, we'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Patty White.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming out. At least we started off the day in very balmy conditions, although rainy, and now we've kind of, as I understand, because I've actually been indoors for quite an extended period of time today. So I understand that it is not as warm currently as it was this morning. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day. We all have busy days and busy evenings, and coming out and having an opportunity for us to share some information with you about the teacher evaluation system and educator evaluation system. I want to first also extend apologies from Superintendent Taymor. She had planned on being here this evening, but like many of us and many of our households, is not feeling well. So she was not able to come out tonight, and quite frankly, I was like, please do not share, you know? Like, keep those germs to yourself. We're really happy to come out and take, you know, that piece. So I'll be doing some of the information. Brent Conway, the principal of Lincoln Schools, will be doing part of the presentation, and Dr. Margaret Adams, our director of curriculum, will be doing some of it. And on the clicker. Okay, so our agenda tonight, we have lots of information to share with you. So hopefully we'll get through all of these pieces. We'll start with just giving you some background information about why we're looking at this, why have we made this shift across the state, and then some specific information about what's happening specifically for teachers and for evaluators. What's that process looking like, and where are we in Melrose in regards to that? So, why are we doing this? First of all, this is not just a Melrose piece, okay? Really across the country, for those of you who've been involved with any kind of evaluation system, sometimes when people have thought about how do you evaluate anyone, depending if you're in business, if you're in education, oftentimes people felt like the evaluation process was kind of being done to them. And what was the process? What was happening? How were people changing their practice? How were people growing? And so there's definitely been lots of discussion across the country about really what does it mean to have a good evaluation system. So, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, part of their vision for the state is ensuring that every child is taught by effective teachers and attends a school that is led by an effective leader, and this is key to addressing achievement gaps. So that's, and again, that's not just for, this new system isn't just for Melrose, this is happening in every district across the state. Let's see. Other pieces, I think the key when I think about what's so different and what's really exciting about this component is the idea that we're establishing common vocabulary and common, clear expectations for what good teaching is. It's not enough for people to go, into a classroom and say, you know, I know what good teaching looks like. Because we want to make sure that understanding is clear and shared by not only myself, but all of our administrators, and that the teachers understand what that looks like as well. So this new system allows us that common ground that we can work from. So we're excited about it. Okay, so a lot to accomplish, and we've actually been doing the work. So we didn't just start this September. Because we're a race to the top district, the state of Massachusetts started this process back in January, so we've been working on it for a year. And we started the process by actually administrators, our union president, Naomi, who's here this evening. We started going to some workshops, getting information, talking about that. And we had to work out the particulars to how is it going to work here in Melrose. So we've been doing that work since January. And up to this point, we have put in place and done some of the background and said we've got to start in September. So at this point, 50% of our staff is in process. So I think we've done a lot of work as administrators and as teachers. And it's really a work in progress. We're learning together. And what are we learning about, Dr. Adams?
So to go through some of the kind of what the process looks like and what the Department of Education and the guidance they've given. There are 4 standards of practice that teachers are asked to work on. These are what makes the expectations for teaching around the career and the profession. So one is around that curriculum piece, the implementation of curriculum within the classroom, planning, how they plan for curriculum implementation, and how they work to assess their students. The second is the teaching of all students. How do they reach all the range of students within their classrooms? And the third being the family community engagement, how they engage the families and work within the community, and also their community being the school that they work in. And professional culture, how they work with their colleagues in teams, and how they work within the professional culture of their school and the district. And so the state gives us rubrics. What a rubric is, it outlines what it looks like when teachers are doing this, and with much more detail. So it gives, again, in that sense that this is really, it's not being done to me, it's really an opportunity to have discussion about what teaching is and what good teaching looks like in classrooms, and have conversations back and forth between teachers and evaluators, and have those conversations. So it sort of helps ground the evaluation system is the standards and the rubrics that are attached to them that outline what it looks like when teachers are doing this. And so it's just not for teachers. Administrators also have standards and those rubrics that outline what their expectations are when administrators are, one, being instructional leaders, when they're leading their schools and their districts around how to improve instruction, curriculum, how to improve the planning process for teaching, and how to improve and use assessment information. So they take on, how are they taking on that role within their designated positions? The operations and management, administrators have roles in operating buildings or districts and managing the everyday stuff that needs to happen in order for a building or district to function. Their ability to family and community engagement, their ability to engage families in the learning process and in the school, and the ability to engage the community in their presence there. And professional culture, how they help establish a professional culture in their schools, among teachers, and among others, and the professional culture also at the district as we work as part of a team as well. So it's just not for teachers. Administrators also have some clear expectations about what is expected of them. And this goes to the DSE vision, the mission about the new evaluating system, is that we have, their mission is that we have an effective teacher and leader for every student in the state of Massachusetts. So this is the process, and it's really, it's important to note that it's a cyclical process, it's continual. And key is continuous learning of us as professionals. So we're always continually learning and improving our craft and our practices and what we do every day. And so it starts there at the top with self-assessment. And I'll show you some examples of what that might look like in a couple of minutes. But it really begins with assessing what do I think are my strengths as a professional, and what do I think my needs are as a professional, and where can I improve, and where can I base my strengths and build upon even my strengths as well. So it begins with that process of kind of thinking about that and self-reflection. And then it moves on to goal setting. So given that kind of self-reflection, setting goals around that of how I'm going to improve my practice. And then given the goals, developing a plan to implement those goals. So you self-reflect, you go into goal setting, setting goals, and then thinking about how am I going to achieve those goals and developing a plan to do so. You implement the plan, obviously, and then at different points there's an opportunity to have discussion with your evaluator, your principal, about your plan and how you're implementing the plan and revising and improving upon it, because all great plans, right, sometimes have detours, and sometimes you do have to change what you plan and make revisions to it, and improve upon it, or say, oh, that one didn't quite work, let me change things a little bit, and so that there are points where you check in and see if we're on the right track. It ends with there's a formative assessment at the midpoint where all the work that the teacher has done is assessed by the evaluator, and then there's a summative being the end kind of point, and then the process continues again, self-assessment. And so it's really that vision, and the assistant superintendent shared, the Melrose vision is really, we're aiming for that continuous learning, that we're continuously learning and improving our practice. It's really meant to be a growth model of getting feedback, improving, and building upon our strengths. So we talked about that. The process starts with the self-reflection and then the goal setting. The state of Massachusetts calls it SMART goals, and I'll explain what SMART means. And Massachusetts also had to make it not just smart, but made it smarter, and I'll explain what smarter also means. So the goals are also, and this is the process too where people are we're all setting goals as professional, but there is also an intent that there be connections between goals. That the goals be based upon the standards that we've been given for teaching and the profession and administrators, that they be based on those, but that they also be based on the district and school goals, so that there's continuation and we're all working together toward the same goal, which is obviously student learning and achievement. And looking at our analysis of our strengths based upon the data, the daily data that we get from students about their learning and other pieces of information. So we're working upon what students' strengths are and needs are, and an analysis of the students that we have in front of us. Teachers develop and administrators develop at least 2 goals. We can always have more, and we're aiming for two really good ones, and really improve upon the 2 goals, focus upon 2 things. Professional practice, so as improving myself as a professional, what am I going to do and learn more about or try in my classroom? And also student learning, so what goal am I going to set so that I'm also working upon improvement of my students and moving them forward and making sure they're growing. So here are some 2 examples of a professional goal and a student outcome goal. These come from the Department of Ed's examples that they've been given. So during the school year, and you'll hear in this first one that it's really an intent to, I'm going to learn about something, and I'm going to try it in my classroom and implement it with my students. So during this school year, I'll learn and use an increasing number of rituals, routines, and responses that prevent most behaviors that interfere with student learning. So based upon self-assessment, a professional goal that I established is I want to learn a little more about this, and I'm going to seek out information and then try it in my classroom. And a student outcome goal focused on actual improvement of student achievement and growth is by the end of the current school year, the percentage of grade 5 students scoring a 3 or better on a writing assessment will improve by this amount. So it's meant to be, I'm going to work on, I'm going to have a plan, first we start with that goal, to help me reach that. And this is again based upon that first step, which was self-assessment and then setting goals. So I believe the next slide is SMART. This is what SMART means. And setting goals in schools is not new. We've set goals for districts. We've set goals at the school level with school improvement plans. And so it's not new, setting SMART goals. What's new is setting goals and kind of aligning all the teachers' goals, administrator goals, school goals, and district goals, and trying to make connections between them. But a SMART goal is specific and strategic. I'm not going to conquer the world. I'm really going to focus on something that is achievable. That's at A2. And it's going to be specific and it's going to be strategic. It's going to be based upon self-assessment and goals and the standards. It's going to be action-oriented. It's something that I'm going to do to improve my practice. It's rigorous and it's realistic. Again, not meant to conquer the world, but a small piece of how the work that I do. And results or focus. So there's a result at the end that can be measurable at the end. It's timed. It's not, I'm going to take 5 years. You know, there's a certain amount of time to complete the task. And like I said, all goals, we've all set goals personally, professionally. You set a goal and sometimes it needs to be revised along the process because sometimes a goal may be too high, it may be too low. We need to change it and improve upon it. And there are multiple places here where in the evaluation system where that conversation can happen and we can check in and improve upon a goal. So while you set it at the beginning, it's meant also, doesn't also have to be static. It may change. And it also changes as we get better at it. So as we get better at this, we'll also change and improve our implementation of it. So here's an example from the Department of Education. They have Sally Smith, she's a 4th grade teacher. She has 11 years of experience. She's in an elementary school, and she has 16% students with disabilities, 10% with students with limited English proficiency. And there's been pretty good growth in her building, in her school, and there's a pretty positive climate. So she brainstorms. Remember, the process starts with self-assessment. She starts and she self-assesses. She self-reflects upon her practice as a professional and thinks, well, what are my strengths? Well, we've worked really hard to improve our math and ELA performance. I've worked really hard to try to meet the needs of the diverse population that we service. And I'm pretty good at family and outreach and communication. Some needs is implementing the revised curriculum framework. So the curriculum frameworks have changed, and how am I going to change to meet that new need that has happened? So needs can also be reflected about changes that are happening to our profession and changes in expectations around the curriculum frameworks. Improving communication with parents, specifically around reading and math, and her leadership skills. So this is her self-assessment. So this is the kind of process of self-reflecting around our professional practice that teachers would begin with, and administrators would begin with. It's not just teachers. So then, given that self-assessment, we also grounded, remember, we're also grounding the work in the standards that come from the Department of Education. And also, this also is based upon district and school goals. So that those 3 things run through the whole process of the evaluation process. So those pieces in red, we're trying to attempt to link to those rubrics. Remember we talked about the rubrics that outline clearly the expectations for what teacher performance looks like and administrator performance looks like for each of the standards. So here's the SMARTER. The state of Massachusetts has called them now SMARTER goals, because in addition to developing the goals, we develop a plan to go with it. And the plan includes really specific action steps. So what are the actions you're going to take to meet that goal? And then also setting benchmarks. So how will you know that you've reached that goal, and what will be the evidence that you've reached that goal? And so thinking about that process and outlining a plan. So you develop a goal, really specific action stands. How does it relate to those standards? And what's the timeline for each of the pieces of it, and what evidence might we collect to show progress toward those goals? And again, an action plan, if you've ever set personal and professional goals, all well laid out plans sometimes need to be revised along the way, so that you begin with good faith, and sometimes circumstances take you in a different way. You learn something you didn't expect, or something changes. So the SMARTER goal piece, you have that goal statement of what you're, and remember we have two SMART goals, one around professional practice, improving my knowledge base, and the second around student learning. Key actions that are in that action plan, and then benchmarks of how you know you're going and meeting that particular goal. And so that's the heart of the teacher's planning around the evaluation, that piece, that self-assessment, goal setting, and planning. So what's really new here, and I alluded to this, we've always set goals as educators in schools and in districts. We've had some pieces of developing them SMART goals, of making them measurable in action. The SMARTER goals piece is pretty new, about really clearly outlining benchmarks and evidence. And it's really, what's really new also is really being explicit about getting better at our professional practice. So that piece about continuously learning and how are we going to get better at our practice. Not just what we're going to do, but how we're also improving upon our professional practice and our students' own learning. So we've kind of alluded to this, that process for for developing goals begins with the district goals. This process in Melrose began by the superintendent giving out the district goals and really looking at that. Schools looked at their own school goals and make sure that there was alignment. And we looked at the standards as well and team goals. So teachers are also, there's an option for teachers to develop individual goals. But teachers can also work together and develop a team goal. So they're all working together. Could be that a group of 5th grade teachers are going to work on a particular goal together. So that allows also for the fostering of collaboration and teachers working together in that process of continuous learning. So that I'm not learning by myself, but I'm sharing that learning with my colleagues and my team and in my school. So there's, in years to come, in the guidance, the guidance from the Department of Ed emerges. So we get new information as it comes out. But in coming years, there is a piece tied to student growth, that our students are growing within our schools, our classrooms, and the district. And that piece is still emerging. We're getting guidance, and it's from the Department of Ed, and we're waiting for that piece. And work with the teachers and the union and talking about what that looks like. And we don't know what that looks like in coming years because the guidance is still coming out. So it's really been a process where things get rolled out slowly, and you sort of read and try to understand and try to work to implement it within the context of the district and the schools that we work in. So the evaluation system, the intent of the Department of Ed, and how that happens is still unclear, is that our goals also include a piece where we look at our actual student performance, which would include perhaps MCAS when that's available, but would include classroom-based assessments, district-based assessments, and things that are portfolios and other types of assessments as well. And that's the intent of the Department of Ed, and what that looks like, still emerging. So this is a graphic to kind of show how the intent is, how district goals line up with school goals, line up with team goals, and the teacher goals. And we're all working toward the power of concentrated action, that we're working together in helping improve the professional practice of individuals, but also as a collective. So it's not as individuals, but there's a lot of pieces, an attempt to make pieces connect for teachers and schools, so we can see the results of that. We know that we're much more powerful when we work not as individuals, but as colleagues and as teams to accomplish goals. I'll pass it off to Mr. Conway.
Thank you. And I think this slide really does speak to some of the things that were mentioned earlier, changing the mindset about observation and feedback. And it's more frequent, unscheduled observations. You heard the word growth earlier tonight, and this is about changing the mindset of educators, both teachers and administrators, into a growth mindset. And we are looking at more frequent and unscheduled observations, and that's one of the biggest changes that we're seeing. So what we're looking at is professional status teachers, and there's some recommendations within the guidelines. More frequent, unannounced observations lasting at least 10 minutes. In our previous system, a professional status teacher was observed once, maybe twice, in a 2-year time frame. And those observations lasted generally the length of a course, length of a class, 45 minutes, 50 minutes maybe. There's an opportunity to meet with that teacher beforehand to know what was coming, to then observe, take notes, sit down and have a conversation afterwards, and then submit a written feedback to that person. And then 2 years later, you do it one more time. If there were concerns in between, might be more frequent. This system really talks about the idea of giving teachers more frequent feedback, meeting with them and watching them teach at various times of the day in various subjects, and really allowing for more conversation around teaching and learning. Everything we know about this process is the more discussion teachers are having about teaching and learning, the better we're going to get. And this is a collaborative process. We have tonight our MEA president, Naomi Bailey, is here. I also see several teachers with us here tonight. And this process all along is meant to foster that communication between the administrator and the teacher. So we have all of our principals, assistant principals, and department heads who've really been looking at how to make these effective. And in about 10, 15, 20 minutes of an observation period, you have a follow-up where you're having conversation with that teacher very shortly after, and then there's written feedback as well. And I'll give you a perfect example of myself last year. I conducted 24 observations. Thus far this year, I've conducted nearly 50. And I'll be on track to do over 100. And it's not so much the numbers per se, it's the availability and the possibility to have more frequent conversations about the teaching and learning that's going on at different times of the day with different students, and to really look for the follow-up and see how things continue to grow and improve. And there are certainly circumstances where observations are longer. When we have non-professional status teachers, we do observe them once or twice in a year where they're announced. It's a longer period of time. There's conversations before, there's conversations after. It's a little bit lengthier of a process. Or any teachers who might be struggling might benefit from a more structured conversation where we can really talk about what's expected as we move along. And this is really about the feedback. And this is where the growth mindset comes into play. And in a few slides, we'll go ahead and we'll see those rubrics, and we'll talk about what that growth mindset really is. But feedback is going to be provided, like we talked about, in conversation, promoting discussion around practice. If I'm walking into a classroom and I'm there for only 15 minutes, I need to have a conversation with that teacher, because I need to learn a few things. I need to learn what went on in the 10 to 15 minutes before, what was involved in the planning before I came in, and what went on afterwards, and what will go on the next day and the day after that. What did you learn as a professional from what went on that day? What did I miss? What can you help me learn about? And that's really where that conversation comes into play. And then there's written feedback as well that's provided that basically follows up on the conversation. And certainly anytime we have written feedback, we can tend to process that a little bit more. And whenever possible, we're really having a conversation with the educator, following up, and you really end up creating this dialogue. And it really targets that support and advice for a teacher. And if there's an opportunity for more resources, what else can we look at? There's a teacher over here that's been doing this aspect really well. Why don't we find time for you to communicate with them? So those are the types of conversations that may occur. There's also a lot of opportunity for praise here. We have some teachers doing some outstanding things. Particularly the many teachers who've been attending a lot of professional development, and you get an opportunity to see them start using the things that they just learned in practice. And now not only am I observing their practice, I'm also observing their commitment to professional growth and development, and I see them putting it into practice. So observations now are really taking into more of not just what you're doing in that moment, what are you doing throughout your professional career and putting it into practice. And that's where it's not just limited to the classroom observations. We know that teaching is a very complex task. There's a lot of work that is done when you don't have students in front of you. You're planning, you're collaborating with colleagues. We have teachers that take lots of work home, do lots of work at home in preparation. But we also know teaching is, as a teacher, you have a role in the school that's a community partner in the school. And you're building relationships with families, and you're establishing professional relationships with your colleagues. And that's all part of the job, that's part of the profession. And these rubrics really do a great job of identifying, and we learned earlier, we saw those 4 standards, really does a great job of establishing what are the expectations for teachers. And it goes beyond just the work that you're doing with kids in the classroom. So there's opportunity where we really can look at what else is going on. How are you using assessment data? I wouldn't necessarily see that in an observation from your classroom. I need to have a discussion with you about that. You need to show me some of the information that you've gathered and how it's impacted your planning. Those are the types of discussions that can occur as well. And they're all aligned. And this is where the beginning stages of having those goals, you begin to see that through line planning. From teacher goals to team goals to school goals to district goals and right back. And they're all aligned. And really, this is where the effective collaboration comes. And you have a great opportunity to really see teachers using those skills in practice when you're observing teachers working together in a meeting, when you get to hear them as a team discussing what they learned at a recent professional development opportunity, or what they learned about student assessment. And we can gather data about teachers in numerous ways. It's going to come in the form of evidence, it's going to come in the form of artifacts, it's going to come in the form of observation. And we can observe educators in meetings with parents. We can observe educators when they're at an IEP meeting, how they interact with parents at dismissal time, how they interact with parents in the evening activity. The reviewing, as this slide suggests, reviewing different types of analysis of homeschool communication. You could certainly, teachers have the opportunity to present artifacts to you so the teachers can show their evaluator a communication log, how they've been communicating with parents. Web pages, what types of information, how frequently, are they providing parents with resources at home, those types of things, and how much of that may be aligned with a goal as well. And there's just so many opportunities throughout the day that extend beyond just what the teacher does while they're in front of the students. And that's really where this shifts a little bit. And teachers, like many of us, we all want to be A students, right? We want to be exemplary. The reality is when we look at a rubric, the new standard is proficient. We expect proficiency. There's an expectation in the state of Massachusetts that only 5% of our teachers will show that they're exemplary. So there's no bell curve here. That's not what we're talking about. And that's what a rubric does. It establishes proficiency. Go to the next one. So this is a cover, basically an overview of the standards. And you see across the top, you see standard 1, standard 2, standard 3, and standard 4. So you see them in silos to some extent. They don't operate in silos. They're very much intertwined. But we do need to think of them in some manner or form in what category they're in. So you're talking about curriculum planning and assessment, teaching all students, family and community engagement, and professional culture. And then under each standard, you see the letters A, B, and C. In this, and then A, B, C, D, and so forth. This is a rubric for classroom teachers. There's an added rubric for those who are maybe specialized teachers working in special ed or working with a caseload of students. And then there's a similar rubric for administrators as well. And it all very much aligns. And then you have specific elements within it. So this is what we really begin to look at. As a district, we're able to focus down, well, we're responsible to do all this at all the time. There's only so much focused work we're going to do, and we focus in on a few of these at a time, and we continue to build out from there. So then you have the overview of the rubric, and then this is the actual rubric. And what you see here is an indicator 1A. So can you go back one? So we go back one, you see standard 1A on the left-hand side, curriculum planning indicator. Within that, there are 4 elements. And then it drills down a little bit further. And that's what the next slide shows. You have 1A, 1, and 1A2. So each of these bars going across are one of the elements. And what we've trained teachers to do, and as evaluators, what we're really doing is looking at proficiency. You can't quite tell it here, but on the rubric, proficiency, the descriptor, and that's an actual description of what proficiency is for subject matter knowledge, it's in bold. And that's where our attention we want to go. We don't read exemplary first, we don't read needs improvement, we look what is proficiency, and that's what we're aiming for. And you can see that when you go into the next, and there are these descriptors at all 4 levels for all of those elements you saw in that previous page. And at the end of a cycle, whether it's a 1-year cycle for new teachers or a 2-year cycle for professional status teachers, the teachers are expected to be proficient in all of those elements. And that's really the information that we're using. And some of the work that we've been doing as administrators is breaking down that specific descriptor for what does that look like in my classroom and where do I fall in terms of making that a reality. And that's part of that self-reflection and continuous professional growth that we've really been focusing on. And then you take all those rubrics and we get to an evaluation rating. And ratings occur at the end of a cycle. And this is a really interesting graphic that they developed sort of at the very end of last year as they started to put this all in place. In year 1 of our implementation here, the bottom part that you see down there called rating of impact on student learning is not in effect this year. That is in effect in future years. And that takes into consideration some of the assessment information Dr. Adams was talking about. And it's not exclusive to MCAS testing. Less than 25% of educators in Massachusetts teach a subject that's measured by MCAS. Less than 25%. So we need to have more measures than just MCAS as a way of looking at what's an impact on student learning. But on the left-hand side, you have a summative rating. And you take all of those elements we just went through, and where does a teacher fall based on the observations and the artifacts and the evidence we've collected. And you give a staff member a rating as exemplary, proficient, or needs improvement. And then once the student assessment information comes into play, they get a rating as their impact on student learning, as being low, moderate, or high. So you can see where you obviously want your teachers to be in the top right-hand quadrant. You want teachers to have proficient or exemplary ratings who are showing moderate and high impact on student learning. And if that's the case, they maintain this is what directs their next cycle. And it directs their next cycle as being a 2-year self-directed growth plan. For someone who is a proficient or exemplary teacher by the observations and the artifacts and all that work, yet from the assessment information indicated that the students didn't grow and learn as much as we would have thought, they want a 1-year self-directed growth plan. So it's just a smaller window, but still very much the same, but we're going to review it in 1 year rather than in 2 years. And then you can see anyone who needs improvement or unsatisfactory has a directed growth plan, which is a growth plan that has more direction from the evaluator. And then you can move into an improvement plan as well. And an improvement plan is a lot of direction from the evaluator with some very specific guidelines as to what the next steps are. So you can see how all this comes into play. It's a lot of new work, and it's a lot of information from many, many different channels. And it ends up helping to really guide the path of growth. And you see that word growth throughout these plans. And the growth is what is part of the collaborative process, and it's where our work really has been. To you, Matt.
That's a lot. We have been very busy, okay? We have been very busy. This has been a lot of good work, a lot of hard work, a lot of communication, collaboration, in getting this going. You know, listening to Mr. Conway talk about just the shift in the number of observations that he's done up to this point. He's already done double the amount that he did all of last year. And granted, last year's times would have been longer periods of time, but just imagine being the building principal, and particularly at our elementary schools, but then when you think of the middle school and high school with even more staff. Think about how you need to plan your time to make sure that you can get into the classrooms and have that time, 10-minute time to stop in, get back to teachers, give feedback, and for teachers to think about having people routinely come through. And across the district, we've been working on that. And some buildings, that was much more a routine occurrence, and in others, it's a little bit different. So everybody's had to think of, reshift and think about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then to have communication about how they might be able to do something better, and how they can grow as professionals. So we've been doing we've had our training, we've developed our smarter goals. Teachers are in the process of collecting evidence to support and show that they've been working on those goals. Many of us are in the process of starting to write the formative assessment component of it. Many of our staff are actively involved. All of our new staff are in this process, and 50% of our teachers who have professional status are involved in this process. All of the administrators are involved in the process. So people are busy. We've been working hard, and it's been good work. So at this point, So at this point, we have given you lots of information. All of this information, there's a wealth on the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. If you just have burning desire to know even more information, at this point. But we will now, we're going to do some questions. So you've had your index cards and some pencils, so that if people have a few questions, want to write those out, we can open it up and we'll see what
Do the questions have to be written on cards, or can we just ask the question?
I think, yeah, that's
We'll start with the card.
Yeah, we'll
So if you want to jot it on the card. So there's a question around the exemplary indicator. The intent of you have to remember the intent of the Department of Education is that all students have a proficient teacher and administrator, a teacher in their classroom, an administrator in their schools. So the proficiency rating is rated toward being the standard. And then the exemplary is, there are always folks, and you can just think of your personal, professional lives, that just are outstanding in some way, in many ways. So that proficiency is meant to be the standard in itself that teachers are meeting. And it's written to say, and it is written that way. And so when you look at the details in the standard, it is meant to be what we expect of teachers in classrooms, what we expect of administrators in their buildings or districts. So that's the intent of the Department of Ed in writing those. So it says, well, only 5% will be exemplary. It's misleading in the sense that proficiency is written to the point where its intent is that all students in the state of Massachusetts have access to proficient teachers, to high quality teachers and administrators in their buildings.
It does seem odd that that's limited to 5% to me. I think that's the part, maybe that's what the basis of the question is.
So if you look at
the goal shouldn't be for everyone to be exemplary.
So if you look at the rubric, yeah, if you look at the indicators in the rubric, it clearly is the intent that this is a great teacher for kids. And then there's the exemplary that is at exceptional, and that's the intent.
That's the mind shift, too.
But what's the limiting? I don't get the limiting to
I think it's
5%.
different that what the state's actually defining is that the people who are exemplary are teachers who are able to model that behavior for other teachers, that they can be a demonstrator of things. And they're basically saying not that it's absolutely limited to 5%, but they don't expect that a school should be finding more than 5% of people who are so exemplary at it that they can basically be the model, do videos of them, and have the other teachers come and watch them. So it's a modeling aspect of it that makes it exemplary.
right. And I think really, again, and the focus on and what's looking at the rubric, what, again, that common language and that clear expectation. I think they took great care in writing out exactly what each of those pieces are. And so our goal really is to get people thinking about what are all of those aspects. And when you looked at that, you know, those 4 columns, there's a lot. This is a thick document talking about each aspect of good teaching practices.
So there's a piece about teacher evaluations and how those documents public or not public. Those are personnel files, and so those are governed by state laws around that piece. So it's not the intent of those to be made public. Just like in many places, it's a personnel file, and those don't know them offhand, but they're governed by state and legal obligations about people's records.
Right. If that was the question, how much of the goal info is made available to the public and at what level, and how can parents get this info? So these are not public documents. They are individual students and administrators' personnel files.
So there's also a question about how parents contribute to the evaluation of administrators. There are survey components, and those administrators would be, parents would be surveyed, students would be surveyed, etc. And that piece is still being evolving from the state. So there's not as clear guidance on what that looks like. And certainly we'd be working with trying to figure that piece out with the state and looking for more information about how that happens. So you have to understand the kind of process we've been in. We've gotten a little bit of guidance from the state. We sort of move on that. We were starting doing training of teachers. The modules, the training modules were still coming out from the state. So it's kind of like we often say we're driving the car while we're building it, and we literally are. We get a little more information from the state and guidance, and then we regroup and say, well, what does this mean and how do we implement it, and get feedback from teachers, the union, administrators, and work and move forward about how do we implement this piece.
Yeah, and we have a working group in place currently of administrators and teachers that's met a few times already. And that group is really to sort of continually sort of self-evaluate as a district together about what can we do to make this process better, what is working, what isn't working, what do we need to revisit. And I think we've already learned a lot just from that process. That's been helpful. And this was a question too about will student feedback be included at the high school level? And it is the intent of the state to include student feedback and parent feedback. The state has yet to figure out how to go about giving districts guidance on that. So I'm sure they'll tell us, and we'll have about 3 weeks to respond or something like that. That's fairly typical, right? Yes.
Right.
So there's a piece about how do you ensure that the observations don't disrupt the classroom. Students are glad to have visitors, and administrators are in their buildings, and teachers just keep going, and they're used to that, and it's not a disruption at all. They just go around their business and keep going. So they're used to that, and the teachers are used to that, and they just keep on going with their teaching and don't necessarily stop. And we don't want them to stop. We want them to keep going and do the business of the education of the students. So it's not a disruption upon the student's day or classroom learning.
A couple good questions are observational responsibilities shared by principal and subject department chair or principal only. Department chairs at the middle school and high school do certainly share their responsibilities with the principal and assistant principal. At the elementary level, the responsibility largely falls on the elementary school principals. Our special ed team chairs, ETFs, are also assisting in that. And we do have some K-12 department chairs who do assist in that as well. So it's a larger group, but it's all working together.
And this, I have a question around, what do you do? What do you do with the assessment data? So again, the whole purpose of this is a growth model for administrators and teachers to be improving their craft. But certainly I think that is somewhat an interesting piece that if by chance we looked at as we go through, and remember we haven't finished this process yet once. So don't really know, but certainly part of what we should be looking at is that if we're seeing any trends in certain areas, like open response questions. Teachers are struggling with open response questions or something. That would be information that we should take as a leadership team and think about what other kinds of supports can we put in place, what kind of professional development do we need to be offering for our teachers if we see any kind of trends that emerge through this process. The other part of that was Are there ties to salary increases or bonuses? That's a good question. There is not ties to salary increases and bonuses. Our current structure is related to how many years teachers have been working and what their degree of education is. And so that's currently how salaries are determined for teachers.
So we have one question about the district goals. And there's a long strategic plan with many goals in it. And what the superintendent asked, that you started off the year by narrowing that for teachers and said, this is a long document and let's narrow in really on curriculum and assessment. And looked at the curriculum and assessment goals and shared those with teachers as the district goals. And they align also with her goals, and they align with administrators' goals around improving curriculum and instruction in the classroom and around assessment, because it's a big, big document. And by narrowing the goals for teachers, and by narrowing a little bit the rubric, we made a very daunting, and that rubric is multiple pages long and very overwhelming. Narrowed it a bit so that we can go through the process, learn about the process, and add to it in future years and continue to improve upon it.
There's a question about goals, sort of two questions, a little bit about goals. When are the goals reviewed and evaluated by someone other than the teacher themselves? And that's a process at the beginning of the year. I know Dr. Adams talked about that self-assessment, goal-setting process. There's multiple meetings, FaceTime meetings, that the supervisor, be it a department head or a building administrator, has with the individuals and with the teams, because there's a lot of team goals. Could be a whole third grade teachers may have a student learning goal around improving literacy performance of students. And those sort of go back and forth a little bit with some conversation about those goals and then the actions. And then you'll find that the actions align to the actions that the district and the building are already working on. So there's a lot of alignment from that perspective. And they need to be approved by the supervisor, but whoever is evaluating that person. So they're not just purely set by the teacher. It's done in collaboration, and then they need to be approved.
So I have a question about administrator certifications and trainings. The administrators have also been going through a lot of training and helping us improve our practice of how to help teachers and give teachers feedback. So we've been involved in that and working and improving our own practice around that and getting better at it. Because we're also learning, while teachers are also learning this process, we're also learning as they're going along. So the administrators have been involved in some training as well, in addition to help us improve our practice around giving teachers feedback, helping develop goals, etc.
And I have a question around that the tool seems to be heavily weighted on the observation component, and concerned that everybody does behave differently maybe when being actually observed. And I want that is a component of the process, but again, there's also the component where teachers are making specific goals and then collecting that evidence and meeting with their supervisors to talk about, yeah, this is what, I read this book, or here's some documents that I've produced, and this is how I've been thinking about it and working with it. So there's different opportunities. It's not just the observation piece. I actually feel that's more how the older model was really heavily about going into that classroom for that period of time and just giving feedback on that isolated piece. This is much more global.
And this is a similar question, that how much is the rating of a teacher being unsatisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, or exemplary, driven by self-report versus assessment by the department head, principal, or other teachers, administrators. And that process of an actual rating is given at the end of a cycle. So for most professional status teachers in district, that cycle is 2 years long. For a new teacher or a teacher who's developing their skill, that cycle is 1 year long. In between, there is a formative assessment or formative feedback period. And right now, for teachers on a 1 year plan, this is that window, sort of in that window right now. Patty alluded to the formative assessments, and the administrators have been doing those formative assessments. So all these teachers get feedback on how they're doing in terms of the rubric and meeting their goals midway through a cycle. So for teachers on a 2 year plan, that feedback will be at the end of this year, and at the end of 2 years, then they get their actual rating. So you take into consideration there's some opportunity for feedback and growth and look for improvement. And then you also take into consideration the artifacts and evidence that the teacher is supplying you that isn't during the time that you're observing. There's many, many things that teachers do that I simply cannot observe. And I really rely on the teachers to show me what they're doing. And the evidence that they're producing and the artifacts aren't manufactured. They're authentic. They're part of what they're doing in their practice. And those become part of that evaluation tool. So there's no percentage one way or the other. It's not cut and dry. But it is certainly, in the end, it's the evaluator's assessment of the teacher's level of proficiency.
So I have a question around meeting diverse needs and how teachers do that in the classroom. So to tie that to the evaluation system, there is a standard around teaching all students, and it describes meeting the needs of students who are struggling at all ranges, and how the classroom is designed to meet the multiple needs that are present in every classroom. So that is a component of the evaluation system and the standards.
And I have a couple of questions that kind of go together. One is about how does the evaluation system ensure that administrators make systematic changes needed so that the burden of educating students doesn't fall solely on the shoulders of the teachers. And then another question is about teachers having access to tools. Okay, so I think both of those questions kind of go hand in hand in thinking about that's part of that whole collaboration component. So when you're sitting down to do that goal setting period, there's a conversation when, you know, the teacher, or if I'm sitting down and I'm talking with the superintendent, the things that I'm interested in working on, things that I feel that I need to focus on. In that conversation, the collaboration, that's the great opportunity for the mentoring and the assistance and guidance to say, oh, this is a great piece. Have you tried looking at this? Here's some tools, here's websites, here's other information that can help you to achieve that. So I think we've been, that process again of shared collaboration, it helps in that process and doesn't make it just be that isolated experience. I think it is how the evaluation system was in the past. And again, we haven't done this system yet. We're in the process. We haven't completed one cycle yet, but as we go through, again, I would be saying that we would be looking at how is this playing out? How are teachers feeling about the process? What are we learning from the process? And how does that impact what we need to provide for supporting our teachers and supporting our students? So I think, again, we haven't done it all yet. We haven't completed that one cycle to say, okay, how did it all play out? What did we learn? What did we learn from how to manage the tool? What did we learn in relation to student achievement? What did we learn from how we structure what we need to provide for teachers? We just haven't done it yet, but I am anticipating that will be a component when we complete the first cycle.
So I think we've answered all the questions. I know myself and my colleagues are willing to stay and talk to folks about other questions people have. But we thank you for your attention. And we thank the folks who came, the school committee, Mayor Nolan, folks who came tonight as well. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.